Hi, I'm Elena. Welcome or welcome back to my channel and welcome to the Modern Classics book tag. I made this book tag exactly 1 year ago when I'm uploading this. This was the first book tag I made on BookTube. It felt like something that every booktuber has to do at some point. It felt like 1 year ago was my time to do it, and I really enjoyed the classics book tag, but I wanted to make a modern classics book tag, especially for more modern classics, which is generally my favorite period in time to read about. What I'm going to do today is do the same tag but 1 year later, because I'm sure all of the questions changed by now. If you're a booktuber or a bookstagrammer as well, all the questions are in the description down below, and I would invite you all to do it if you would like to. So the first question of this book tag is a question that a lot of people got very confused about, which I loved. And that is, what is the definition of a modern classic to you? I believe I still kind of agree with what I said 1 year ago. I think it is a term that has quite a loose interpretations that can be very personal. I am generally quite an advocate for saying that classics are not necessarily the canon, which is recognized by maybe your school or your university, but classics is just a book written in history that has a certain significance to us in the modern day. My idea of what a classic is generally bigger and broader than what maybe more other people would consider a classic, and it is always my goal to find more books written in the 20th century or earlier that maybe don't make the canon, that I feel are still really worth reading and worth our attention. Looking at a modern classic, I would say mainly 20th century literature, but I think the farther we get into the 21st century, the further on that slide. So I would say a modern classic is a book that has been written in the last 100 years. I have been really debating within myself whether a book that was written in the 90s can already be considered a modern classic, because it has been 30 years. I was born in the 90s, let's not dwell on that, because books like The Secret History have such a big influence on books nowadays that it does feel like a classic. And I would love to know how you feel about that, because in my opinion, books from the 90s, especially if they have a big influence on literature nowadays, even if the author is still alive, I feel it can be a modern classic. But I would love to know which you think is the latest possible date that you can call something a classic. It's something I would really like your opinion on, so leave a comment down below, let me know how you feel about that. I didn't really change my mind on that one, even though I've had an extra year to obsessively think about this, which I think it's such a difficult topic to think about, to discuss, but the more you read, the more you get a grasp, I think, on certain definitions and what certain books mean to you. I have a big pile of books over here to show you and to help me answer these questions. So let's get to the second question. Your favorite subgenre: gothic, romantic, historical fiction, political, etc. My answer back then was historical, and I still really feel that. I still really enjoy historical modern classics, but I think romantic is something that I've been really enjoying as well. I've been reading some contemporary romance too, and I think I can definitely enjoy the value of a romantic story, even though the plot is always very predictable. The way that love is viewed and that emotions are viewed is something that I've been finding really interesting to read about in 20th century literature as well, because of course there was such a switch in how we view love, in how we view marriage, in how we view the right to love, and I've been really enjoying reading about that, especially from a more radical point of view, from the early queer community and what love meant to them, and how they could feel, for example, very free within writing a novel if they knew it was never going to be published, like Maurice by Ian Forster, or how they showed incredible bravery and used the difficulty of society as a beautiful symbolism, like in Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. That's been something I've been really enjoying this last year. Question number 3. An author from the 20th century whose books you would recommend. Of course, I mentioned Toni Morrison, but by that time I had already read Beloved, which is one of my favorite books of all time. So in the last year I've read 3 more novels by Toni Morrison. I've read The Bluest Eye, I have read Sula, and I have read A Mercy. A Mercy is a very recent novel of hers. This one is from 2008. I think from all 3, I love this one most, which was very surprising to me. I think The Bluest Eye and Sula, I could definitely see their value and the beautiful writing of Toni Morrison, but I don't think I love those 2 as much as I loved A Mercy and Beloved. I think looking back, it's definitely the rural setting of the 2 ones that I really enjoyed. So yes, I would still and always recommend Toni Morrison. Another author I've discovered this year is Eileen Cheng. I read Half Lifelong Romance, which is still the only novel that I have read by her, but this is an author I would definitely recommend as well. What I said earlier about being interested in romance and the meaning of marriage and how love was viewed, this is a perfect example from the 1950s from a Chinese perspective on romance and love. I would highly recommend this book. Another author I've been reading more from, which I had been anticipating when I did the tag the first time, is Shirley Jackson. If you like gothic themes and if you appreciate it when you have to do some work as a reader, when you're not given all of the answers and when you like to maybe imagine the world bigger as that it is presented in the books, then I would recommend Shirley Jackson. We Have Always Lived in a Castle and The Haunting of Hill House. I would say especially The Haunting of Hill House is quite a vague book and might be very different from what you're expecting if you've like seen a Netflix show, so be aware before reading that. I would recommend this one over The Haunting of Hill House because I just really enjoyed the sisterly relationship in this one. Question number 4. Your favorite modern classic so far this year? Last year I mentioned Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier and The Waves by Virginia Woolf. The Waves by Virginia Woolf made it on my favorites of 2021 list. Rebecca didn't, but I did think of adding it, so maybe did I add it in honorable mentions? Possibly, but I still feel really positive and 5-starry about both of these books. I haven't been reading a lot of 20th century literature this year because I've been doing the Brontelang, of course, so that is taking up a lot of my classics reading space. But my favorite so far is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. But this is about a man called David who, together with his girlfriend Hella, goes to Paris, and once they're there, they separate to think about what they want from their relationship, and in that space David meets Giovanni and they have an affair. This is again such beautifully symbolistic writing about what romance meant if you were gay in the 1950s, which is such a complicated subject, but James Baldwin was more than up to the task and wrote a beautiful, very short novel about it. Question number 5. A modern classic that surprised you. I mentioned Shirley Jackson and I've now read more short stories by Shirley Jackson, The Lottery and Other Stories, and I've read The Haunting of Hill House. This one was a 5-star read for me. This one I did not love as much as a collection, but I still really enjoy Shirley Jackson's writing and I want to keep on reading more of her works. A classic that has most surprised me in the last year is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This was a gift from Lucy and she also made me read it. I have a whole reading vlog about it. I will link it down below if you want to watch it. But this was really surprising because I was very hesitant about reading this. I had read Isabel Allende, who I didn't love, and I know that there are a lot of parallels between their works, so I thought there was a big chance of me just not getting on very well with this type of magical realism. This was really interesting. This is like the generational stories of generational stories. We are in this fantastical small town and we follow a family through different generations, and there are certain problems, things that really are pretty fucked up that keep insisting in every line of the generation. This is about so many horrible people, but still you can find a beauty within everything that he writes. I find it difficult to talk about this book having read it quite a few months ago. I read it in October, I think. This one really surprised me and I liked it way more than I had anticipated. Question number 6. A modern classic that was disappointing. Back then I said 1984 by George Orwell. I don't really have any new feelings about this book. And since then I think I was quite disappointed by The Lottery because I had read a few short stories by Shirley Jackson, which I adored. Then there were a lot of short stories in this one that I just didn't like. It felt very repetitive to have them all in one collection. I am not opposed to short story collections, so it's not the concept that's bothering me. It's just a lot of these stories were very daily and ordinary. And apparently I don't really love that in Shirley Jackson's writing style. So that was a bit disappointing. Another one that was disappointing was Ariel by Sylvia Plath. This is a poetry collection and I feel like it's quite controversial to say that you don't like this. I'm in general not the biggest fan of Sylvia Plath, which I almost feel like I need to whisper. But there are just so many problematic elements in her writing that, you know, you want to place a book in the time. But even in its time, a lot of ways that Sylvia Plath draws comparisons is just so, it's just so wrong, and I couldn't look beyond it. I think with Sylvia Plath, her work is quite personal, and I think it's quite important that you feel a certain connection with the way that she thinks, with the way that she reasons, and I just really don't. I can see that she was quite good at writing poetry. I couldn't look beyond it, so it was quite disappointing because this is such a pretty edition and I had such high expectations, but alas. Question number 7. A modern classic you want to reread. So this I think is the only question that has not changed. So I made a plan 1 year ago and I haven't done it. I mentioned Beloved by Toni Morrison and Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, which I really wanted to reread. Especially this one I wanted to reread soon because it's been such a long time since I read it. And I haven't reread any of these. Not going to change the question, I still really want to reread them. These are staying for this question and who knows next year. Question number 8. A recent release you think will be a modern classic in a few decades. Back then I said Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine and Fristo, which I think still holds up. This was a really great novel. Right now, I'm going to pick a book that I just finished a few weeks ago, and that is The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr. This is a historical fiction that is set on a plantation. It's just written so beautifully. It's full of heart. I still need to get in my notes and my fonts and talk about it in my wrap up, but this is just such a good book, and it is a debut novel, which I think is very hard to believe because the writing is just so masterful, so crafted, so well written. If this isn't going to be a modern classic in a few decades, I am pretty sure other books by Robert Jones Jr. will be. I don't know if he's writing another book. I really hope so because I would love to read it. Question number 9. The next modern classic on your TBR. Last year I mentioned The Makioka Sisters by Junichiro Tanizaki, which I really enjoyed. Gave it a 4 stars, so I did read that. Right now I'm doing my TBR board, so I don't really know which classics are on my direct TBR. It's up to my TBR board what I'm going to read and what modern classics I'm going to read. So this is my modern classics book tag 1 year later. Feel free to do the tag as well and don't forget to let me know because I would love to see it. For now, thank you so much for watching and I hope that you have a lovely day or evening and I hope to see you in another video. Doei!